Navigating a career in tech is like one of those nightmares where you're running down a forever hallway with a million doors, and for each one that has something good behind it, there are two that have a pit of despair. But seriously, each door represents a path you can take that can either improve or impact your career. When I started, I went through a lot of the wrong doors. I mean, that's part of life, right? However, as I started noticing patterns, response, and growth, I realized there were things I could do to make sure I always picked the right door, and in the event that I didn't, I could mitigate the impact on my career and essentially not fall down a pit of despair. What this meant is that I accelerated my career over 5 years from junior to senior engineer, whilst people I started with are still taking junior or mid-level roles. What you need to know is that through all the experiences that I went through my own career, both positive and negative, I learned incredible things. Now I'm going to go through just 6 of them today, which are going to have the biggest impact on your career growth. And once you understand these 6 things, you will see insane levels of growth, responsibility, and the money that comes with doing all the things that are expected of a high-performing junior engineer from senior engineers, engineering managers, your peers, and most importantly, the business. The first thing I'm going to cover is how to have the right positive impact on senior engineers and engineering managers in your team. Now, when I first started out my career, I had no idea how to make a positive impact on senior engineers, how to approach them, how to talk to them, or what I should even be doing to build a relationship with them. But I figured something out really quickly, and this led to me getting the nickname Absolutely. It was written in my one-to-ones. My manager told everyone that I was the Absolutely guy. Why, and why did that impact my career? When I was in my first and second roles in tech, there was nothing I wouldn't do. I was taking on tickets that were beyond my skill set. The senior engineers in my team knew they were beyond my skills. My engineering managers knew they were beyond my skills, but I would still give them a try. Whenever my manager came to me and said, hey, can you give this a go? Or one of the senior engineers said, why don't you give that a try? My response was always, as you guessed it, absolutely. This led to me having huge amounts of recognition from my senior peers and the managers around me at the time. They knew I didn't have the skills to do it. I knew I didn't have the skills to do it, but I stayed persistent and it took on my technical skills leaps and bounds. But I will caveat this by saying I was extremely lucky. I worked with a team that enabled me to do this, to take more technical tasks, because if I got stuck, I would always go to them and say, hey, I've tried this, I've tried that, it's not worked. And they would really love that. And then they would then help me fix what I'd caused or point me in the right direction so I could figure it out myself. So a very important step to take when you are early on in your career is having the right impact on the senior engineers and management in your team. And you can achieve this by doing things out of your comfort zone and doing it with a positive attitude. So now I'm going to let you into an industry secret. When I started at my current company, there was a senior engineer and I'm going to call him Mark. Mark was a fantastic person and a very good engineer. Mark worked for the payments team, and we were a company that was turning over close to £1 billion a year. So the systems that he was building were very, very important. So that made Mark important. Now last year, Mark handed in his resignation and the company went wild. They were offering him bonuses, promotions, all sorts of things to try and get Mark to stay. Ultimately, he didn't. But it was amazing to witness how much the business was trying to keep him there and how far they were willing to go because of what he was doing. Now, at the same time, another engineer handed in their resignation. We're going to call him Adam. Adam worked on internal systems and he was also a senior engineer and he was fantastic at what he did. But when Adam handed in his resignation, they were hiring his replacement before his feet had even left the building. Now, the contrasting difference between the way they were both treated came down to the area they were working in. In other words, if you want to be a Mark and not an Adam, you need to become irreplaceable. And to do that, you need to work in an area of the company that delivers high impact value. As you progress and learn new skills, you need to move into an area of the business that delivers the most value, profit, or the most value to the customer. Once you start building the domain knowledge, you become irreplaceable. Now, I've covered how to have the right positive impact on senior engineers and engineering managers and what the value of working in a high impact area of the business will have on your career. There's another 4 things to cover and they are just as important. So whenever you are learning to code, you follow a tutorial. There's chapters and there's sections. You usually start off very basic. This is the syntax, and then you might move on to functions, and then into something like data manipulation. The point is that it's all set out for you. You manage your own pace, you manage your own progression. Now, your career is not the same. Not all managers are the same. So how should you manage your manager so that you can gain the feedback needed to build a good career? One of the most detrimental things you can have in your career, no matter what industry you work in, is having a passive manager. When your one-to-one feedback is very vague, like you're doing a great job, keep going, or you're on track, nothing to worry about. It sounds great, right? There's nothing bad about that, but it is not actionable or constructive feedback. That's the kind of feedback that will have you stalling in your career very quickly. So how do you handle a situation like this, which is actually more common than you think? First of all, as with most things related to your career, always go in with evidence. Go in with a list. Hey, I've done these front-end tickets for the last 4 or 5 weeks. I'd love to pick up something on the back end just to expand my knowledge a little bit. 9 times out of 10, no good manager will ever say no. They always appreciate when somebody wants to expand their knowledge because they've become an asset on another part of the system. And the bonus of having this open and clear communication with your manager is that they are now aware that you want to expand your skill set. So when they are writing stories or breaking down tickets and features, they know, hang on, this is an easy backend ticket to start with. I'll pass it to so-and-so because they said they were interested in learning a bit more about backend systems. Now, what do you do if they don't do that? Well, what I would suggest is that you pick up a backend ticket anyway, one that you think you can do with minimal input from anybody else, and get it done. Nobody's ever been chastised for trying to do more work, and nobody in the history of work has ever been fired for doing more than what they were asked. Now, we've covered 3 very important points: how to stand out to senior engineers and managers, the impact of working in a high value area on your career, and also how to manage your manager for career growth. I'm going to give you the next 3 actionable points. So if you want career growth as a software engineer, pay attention. Now, I'm going to hazard a guess that none of you watching this right now are watching the video on a Nokia phone. You're watching it on either a Samsung or an iPhone, right? I'm recording this on an iPhone. But I remember when I was 14 and I saved up all my money that year and I bought a Nokia 3210. If you don't know what that is, Google it. It's the greatest phone of its generation. Now, it was the best thing since sliced bread. It had Snake and monophonic ringtones. Because it was around Christmas time, it came preloaded with the Jingle Bells theme. And in school, I was the man. But what does this story have to do with your career? Well, prior to 2007, Nokia had a huge part of the market. Everyone had a Nokia phone. But then in 2007, along came Apple with the iPhone and revolutionized the industry. They had touchscreens, they had the App Store. So in came Apple to the market. And what did Nokia do? Nothing. They said, hey, we're just going to concentrate on our part of the area, let them do their thing, and we'll see what happens. Now, we all know how that story ended, and this is how it relates to your career. As software engineers, our day-to-day is picking up tickets which are building small parts of a very large app. Now, the problem with that is that a lot of engineers, even senior engineers and more experienced people, only ever think about the small part that they're building. They miss the bigger picture. This often leads to things like building things which have no use, that deliver no value or have no impact on the business or customer. Now, much like Nokia in 2007, they didn't see the bigger picture. They were only concentrating on what they were doing. Could you imagine where they would be today if they saw the scope of where they could be, or they looked at the bigger picture? To deliver value, as we mentioned in the last point, you need to look beyond your small contributions and think about how the customer is using your product. Think about how the business is going to gain value from your product. If you're not delivering value, saving money, gaining money, saving time, there's something wrong. Ask questions and don't be afraid to push back to senior engineers or managers if you do not understand the net value of what you are going to be building. When you start understanding these things and asking those questions to your senior engineers and to the managers, you will very quickly become a very important person in your team. So delivering a ton of value is all well and great, but what happens when you stop getting the recognition you deserve, or if you've never got it at all? Well, then you leave. At the first company I worked for, I was a mobile app developer. If you follow my channel, you already know this story. But if you don't, make sure you sub and like the video, please. I worked incredibly hard as a career switcher. The issue was the only senior developer on the team was in India. He was a contractor. It was hard to work the same hours. There were communication issues. It was a terrible place to be for my career growth. There are 3 hallmark signs for when you know the time has come to move on. Number 1, no or little learning. Number 2, no growth opportunities. And number 3, a bad or toxic work environment. Now, totally opposite to that, in my most recent company, I was working very hard for my promotion to senior. I was doing all the right things. I had my brag sheet with all my wins. I had actionable feedback from managing my manager. I owned and delivered 3 large projects that delivered value, saved time, and made money. And to add the cherry to the pie, the other senior engineers on the team were telling me that I should be getting the promotion now because I was doing the work. Now, what you need to know about promotions in tech is that you don't get promoted to then do the job. You get promoted because you are already doing the job. Well, that promotion didn't come, and it was through no fault of my own. So I handed in my resignation. I landed a role as not just a senior at another company, but they gave me a position at the top level of senior. Now, the company I left not only has to fill that hole, they also lost 3 years worth of domain knowledge and relationships within the business. Now, there are 2 things you should take away from this point. Number 1, when to leave because there's no growth or learning. Or number 2, when to leave because there's no growth for your career. So for those of you who have followed my channel or my socials for a while, you know that I've helped hundreds of engineers into the industry. And with that, I've seen what makes a fantastic junior engineer and what makes a bad one. So what are the biggest differences between the two, and how could you stay in the right side and not the bad side? I'm going to break this down into 4 brief sections, and we're almost done now. Now, number 1, growing up as a child, I always asked a lot of questions. I didn't talk a lot, I asked a lot of questions. It got to the point where my mum would warn people that if you're coming in here, the Grand Inquisitor was gonna have a go at you. When I entered the tech industry, I did the exact same thing. I asked a lot of questions. I never felt stupid asking a silly question. I wanted to know how things worked, why did we use certain technologies, and how it all came together. Being inquisitive is a fantastic sign that somebody's engaged and wants to learn. With that being said, the worst junior developers I've ever worked with asked no questions. Number 2, so you've asked the questions, but what do you do with the answers? Well, I'm going to revert you back to the beginning of this video where I got the nickname Absolutely. Gaining knowledge from asking questions and not doing anything with that knowledge is like being a donkey carrying books. Take what you learn from asking questions and implement it. The worst junior developers take no action, have no interest in building or tackling complex problems. Now, in my glorious journey from junior to senior engineer, one of my defining points was deleting customer data from a prod database. At this point, I was trying to do more than I could handle, and I ended up losing focus. During a meeting, instead of listening, I was trying to multitask and build a data pipeline to put some data into an S3 bucket. And what I actually ended up doing was overwriting the data that was already existing in the bucket. The next 15 minutes were the most intense and frightful of my career. I looked at my wife and said, I think I'm about to get fired, because I had to nudge my manager on the meeting, ask him, could we leave, because there is something urgent I needed to talk to him about. Now, thankfully, it all worked out because I'm here, right? But what did I learn? Well, failure is okay, but you have to learn from it. I never made the same mistake again. I concentrated on the task at hand and stopped multitasking when I was doing complex things. This is the point I like to call failing forwards. Now, point number 4, and this is the last one. A company I worked for decided to take on apprentices. They took on a few in each of the different teams, and we got one ourselves. Over the course of a year, we heard from this apprentice about 3 times. He turned up late, some days he didn't turn up, and this wasn't from the lack of trying from senior engineers, myself, and the engineering management. Quite simply, he didn't want to engage. He didn't have the right attitude. He didn't want to learn. I don't know what he was doing there. Now, the worst thing about this is that he was actually a really talented developer. But as you can imagine, he didn't stay in the job very long. And it's a shame because it was one of the highest paid apprenticeships I've ever come across. So those 4 things, asking questions, taking action, failing forwards, and having the right attitude, is what makes the difference between a fantastic junior developer and somebody who's probably not going to be in the industry very long. Now, I love telling stories and sharing my experiences like this. If you want to develop your career in tech, check out my school community where we have weekly coaching calls, daily accountability threads, career growth tips, and more. The link is in the comments.